Hello everyone, Jacob here. In today's lesson, we're going to talk about how to say 뭐뭐뭐한 or 뭐뭐뭐하는 척하다 in English. Well, to do this, you have to use one of these two structures. You can say to pretend to verb or to pretend that and then a full sentence. To pretend that subject, verb, object. And let's go ahead and look at our first example. Sometimes I pretend to listen. Sometimes I pretend to listen on the phone. Okay, what does this mean? Well, basically this means that when I'm on the phone, sometimes I sound like I am actually listening, but I'm not listening. It seems like I'm listening, but I am not. Sometimes I pretend to listen on the phone. Maybe while I'm talking, I go, yeah, okay, oh, cool, when I'm talking, but actually I'm not listening. I usually do this with my parents sometimes, when I'm talking to my mom sometimes, and it's a really long conversation. Sometimes I get distracted and I stop listening. Sometimes also just with my friends or even sometimes with my girlfriend. If she hears this, maybe she's going to be angry, but I think everyone pretends to listen sometimes when they're on the phone. So anyway, here we're using it like this, in the first structure, to pretend to verb, to pretend to listen. But you could also say, I pretend that I'm listening, or I pretend that I listen. All right, and it has exactly the same meaning. All right, so either way is okay. Pretend to listen or pretend that I'm listening. This will mean, in Korean, 듣는 척해요. 가끔 전화할 때 듣는 척해요. All right. So let's go ahead and look at our second example, which is related to my life in Korea. I pretend not to speak Korean. So as you know, I speak some Korean. I speak Korean pretty well, I think, and usually I'm quite proud of the fact that I can speak Korean. But there are some situations where I pretend not to speak Korean. If I get stopped by the police. If I get stopped by the police while I'm driving, I usually pretend not to speak Korean, because if I speak Korean, maybe they will get me in trouble. I will get in trouble. But if I pretend not to speak Korean, then usually I feel like they just let me go. They don't say anything. So I think it's best not to speak Korean, to pretend not to speak Korean if I get stopped by the police. All right, so this is one of the advantages of living in Korea. If I get stopped by the police, I can just pretend not to speak Korean, and they usually don't do anything. All right, so you can say that, pretend not to speak Korean. So this is negative. You have to add not. All right, and in Korean, this would mean 한국말 못하는 척하다. Okay, so you could say that, or you can say I pretend that I don't speak Korean. Both are fine. Okay, I pretend that I don't speak Korean. Either way is okay. All right, so this in Korean means 한국말 못하는 척하다. Okay, so if you want to make a negative sentence, make sure you add this not in front of the verb, or you just say pretend that and then make a negative sentence. All right, so here we saw two examples with just regular verbs, and now we're going to look at some examples with some adjectives and a noun. All right, so if you want to use it with an adjective or a noun, you just say to pretend to be, and then you have either an adjective or a noun. Okay, so that's not too difficult, but I'm just going to write it out for you anyway. To pretend to be an adjective or to pretend to be a noun. So let's go ahead and look at examples like this. We could say, for example, I hate people who pretend to be smart. I hate people who pretend to be smart. So we're following kind of the same structure, except we're using this verb to be, and then we're putting an adjective after. And in Korean, what does this mean? This means 똑똑한 척한 사람 싫어요. All right, so that is an example with an adjective. Now let's go ahead and look at an example with a noun. My friend my friend pretended to be Lady Gaga's manager one time. All right, one time I went to Seoul and I met my friend, and we were just hanging out in the street, and there were some girls also hanging out in the street. It was in Hongdae, and my friend went up to them and talked to them and pretended to be Lady Gaga's manager because there was a Lady Gaga concert that night. So he just decided it would be funny if he pretended to be Lady Gaga's manager. So again, here we're using kind of the same structure. We have pretend to be, and then we have a noun, Lady Gaga's manager. So this is kind of a weird example, but it's a true story. And the girls actually believed him. Maybe just because he was a foreigner, he was white, they actually believed that he was Lady Gaga's manager, even though he is not. All right, so that is basically how we use this structure to pretend to verb, or to pretend that plus a full sentence. All right, and that is pretty much how we say 뭐뭐한 or 뭐뭐한 척하다 in English. But there is another way that you can say this, another translation that is also possible, but I'm going to talk about that in the next video. So keep watching, and I'll see you next time.